Dragapult EX is a problem in the Pokemon trading card game. If you've been following Pokemon in any capacity, you'll know this by now. But for those of you who don't play Pokemon, don't worry, I'll fill you in on what's happening. Right now, Dragapult is putting up numbers that would get the deck banned in almost every trading card game. This pesky Pokemon has been a part of the metagame ever since its release, but recently it's completely taken over. Pult is so dominant right now, in fact, that other decks are being forced to play up to half a dozen tech cards just to deal with it. The meta is completely warped around this dragon Pokemon that attacks for 200 damage and distributes 60 damage to the bench however it feels like, while drawing a bunch of cards every turn in the process. How did we get here? How does this compare to the broken metagames of other card games? Does Dragapult need a ban? Hi everyone, for those of you who are new here, I'm Gen TCG and I make videos about trading card games. I've been playing card games for over 10 years now, so I've learned a lot that I'd like to share with you guys. So if you're interested in what else I have to say about other card games, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of my future videos. Now onto how Dragapult went from a tier 2 off-meta deck to the absolute titan that it is today. Dragapult EX is a 320 HP, stage 2 Pokemon that has 2 attacks. Its first attack does 70 damage for a single energy, but its main attack is Phantom Dive, which costs 2 energy and does 200 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, and spreads 60 damage to your opponent's benched Pokemon however you like. Just for some context for those of you who don't play Pokemon, Phantom Dive is widely considered to be the best attack in the game right now, since 200 damage can take out a huge chunk of HP from your opponent's Pokemon or even kill it outright. And that 60 damage being spread across the rest of your opponent's team adds a lot of flexibility for you to finish off weaker damaged Pokemon. Unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic, you can only attack with one Pokemon per turn, and the game is won by knocking out your opponent's Pokemon and taking prize cards. So the ability to take out multiple knockouts in one turn is extremely powerful. Not only is Dragapult a very strong attacker, but it also evolves from a stage 1 Pokemon Dracloak, which has the Recon Directive ability that lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck and choose one to add to your hand and one to put on the bottom. So, the best attacker in the game also has an extremely powerful draw engine built in. Are you following me yet? This all sounds super broken, right? So this might surprise a lot of you, but Dragapult actually started out as a pretty fair card. I know I've just described Pult in a way that makes it sound unbeatable, but its biggest flaw is that it's a relatively slow deck to get going, since it requires lots of manual energy attachments and evolutions to be able to use Phantom Dive. When it was originally printed in 2024's Twilight Masquerade, Pokemon was in a very fast format with strong aggressive decks. Dragapult was still pretty good, mind you, but it was mostly just a fun B-tier deck you could play. For the most part, Dragapult EX was actually used as a great attacking option for the toolboxy Regidrago deck. This deck filled the discard pile with various Dragon-type Pokemon and copied their attacks using Regidrago V-Star's Apex Dragon attack. And while Regidrago was a broken deck in its own right, and I might make a video about all the problems that deck has caused, it wasn't Dragapult EX that broke it, but rather this Kyurem card that let Drago take up to 3 knockouts in a single turn. But like I said, the pure Dragapult deck was just okay. It managed to land a few top finishes over the next month, but it was never a dominant force. But this all changed with the printing of Budew. Budew is comparable to Floodgate in Yu-Gi-Oh! Its attack prevents your opponent from using any item cards in their next turn, which are analogous to spell cards in other games. It's a card that in theory any deck can use since it has 0 energy requirements for its attack and retreat cost. Aggressive decks that wanted to take early knockouts and get a fast lead weren't interested in Budew at all when it was printed. But remember what I said about Dragapult's biggest weakness being how slow it was to get the ball rolling? Well, now suddenly Pult had the perfect card to bolster its relatively weak early game. Dragapult decks could play 2 copies of Budew and force every other deck in the format to play at a slower pace, meaning Pult would get the time it needed to get set up. This card single-handedly catapulted the Pokemon into top tier. For the next year in GHI block, Dragapult was never worse than an A-tier deck, and at times it was considered the best deck in the format. Other decks had to respect Dragapult's game plan of slowing down the early game and taking over in the mid to late game. The main way decks could beat Dragapult were to either be faster than it, to play a lot of cards that could send its spread damage back at it, or to play Pokemon that could just straight up kill it in one hit. And Dragapult was beatable, mind you. GHI block is widely considered to be very well balanced. It had fun gameplay and a lot of room for skill expression. I wouldn't be shocked if many players remembered this format fondly and still played it years into the future. Kinda like how Yu-Gi-Oh! Players still play Edison or GOAT format. But all good things have to come to an end, and G-Block rotated, which took out all of the other decks that could even compete with Dragapult's power level. Gardevoir was widely considered to be Dragapult's worst matchup, and it completely rotated out. Other decks like Charizard and Goldengo weren't direct counters, but they were on a relatively similar power level to Dragapult, and they rotated too. Decks like Raging Pult didn't rotate entirely, but they lost significant pieces to their engine. Meanwhile, Dragapult did lose a couple of notable support cards like Countercatcher and Iono, which both played well into its strategy, but overall, it survived largely unscathed. Well, what does this all mean? Well, it means that no decks coming in to fill in the hole that all the other decks leaving left meant that Dragapult could just take over the metagame. Before I show you what the metagame looks like today, let me show you what a healthy metagame looks like. I'm going to use Las Vegas Regionals in November 2025, mostly because it's the most memorable to me because that's when I made it to Phase 2 for the first time. As you can see here, Goldengo reached about 18%. Gardevoir reached about 18% when combining both variants, and Dragapult reached about 13%. Adding up all three of these percentages, we get 48.3%. Now remember this percentage, other decks besides the top three still made up over half the metagame. Fast forward to today. The metagame is still evolving, but as of May 2026, Dragapult EX has reached ridiculous levels of dominance. On May 9th, 2026, 31.9% of players brought Dragapult to the Los Angeles Regional. And at Phase 2 of this tournament, 47% of all remaining players were on Pult. 47%. That is an insane number no matter how you slice it. This is almost as much as the best 3 decks combined at that Vegas Regional. Pokemon TCG hasn't seen this level of meta dominance by a single deck since the aptly named Broken Lugia era in late 2022. Heading into the current format, it was widely agreed that Dragapult would be a top tier deck. But after LA, everyone in the community understood that Pult was, without question, the deck in the room to beat. Every deck had to have a game plan against it. You could no longer hope to dodge this matchup like you could when it was only like 13% of the room. As of me writing the script, 2 more tournaments have taken place since LA. These were regionals held in Campinas in Brazil and Utrecht in the Netherlands, both held last weekend on May 16th and 17th. Regional Campinas unfortunately wasn't streamed by Pokemon, but using this tool at labs.limitlesstcg.com, I was able to combine the data for both tournaments. Pult was played by 28.5% of players overall, and in Phase 2, Pult still made up 1/3 of all of the decks in the room. This is after players jammed every free slot in their deck with cards to counter Dragapult. Even with all sorts of anti-Dragapult tech cards running around, like Battle Cage, Mist Energy, and Lily's Clefairy, you still had a better chance to make Phase 2 playing Dragapult than compared to the average player. But I guess the real question is this format still fun to play? I've heard multiple opinions. Some people are happy with the variety of new Tier 2 decks you can play, but others are frustrated that the format went from having multiple top tier options to just Dragapult, and are even to the point of feeling burnt out from playing Pokemon entirely right now. Here's a clip from an episode of the Shift Gear podcast aptly titled Is This Hell?, where Anil, one of the hosts, shares his own opinion about this.
I don't think that most people have the longevity, and like God bless your soul, because I couldn't do it. The longevity to like play through the game when they're not having fun. And I think this is just like a visual of how quickly the game can kind of flip and how we go through like these cycles of like game's good, game's bad, game's good, game's bad. And like my point was just that like it's not always roses. It's not always as good as what we had. And you and I had talked about this to death. Like the Ascended Heroes format, man, missed that. Missed that for real.
I fully relate to what Anil says in this clip. That's actually a big reason why I even got into Yu-Gi-Oh! In the first place. I'm just really not a big fan of the current Dragapult meta. Broken metagames are something that every card game will experience from time to time. This is in no way unique to just Pokemon TCG. Before I started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, I used to play Magic competitively, and 2 of the most broken metagames I can think of in recent memory were Hogak Summer and Oko Standard. Hogak Summer took place in 2019 when the first Modern Horizons set was printed. Hogak Arisen Necropolis enabled many degenerate graveyard strategies and quickly took over the metagame. It was played at more than double the rate that Is It Phoenix was played at, breaking over 20% of the metagame. Typically in Magic, graveyard decks were seen as Game 1 decks because their game plan was to handily win Game 1 and then try and squeeze in a win in either Game 2 or Game 3, playing through powerful hate cards that their opponents would bring in from their sideboard. But Hogak was so dominant that opposing decks began playing graveyard hate in the main deck. Some players even went as far as to play 4 copies of Leyline of the Void in the main deck. And even through all this hate, Hogak performed better than every other deck in the meta. Hogak got targeted by multiple bannings of its combo pieces and still dominated. Eventually, Hogak itself had to get axed after 73 days. Oko Standard was even more warped around a single card. At Mythic Championship 6, Oko, Thief of Crowns, was played in 69% of the metagame. 69% of the metagame was in blue-green colors. Oko was even more of a problem than Hogak, since if your opponent removed your Oko with a removal spell that targeted planeswalkers, which already wasn't even that common, you could just play another one. And even if you didn't have another one, Oko wasn't the linchpin of any combo deck or anything, it was just a really good value piece. So it's not like your deck suddenly stopped working, you just kept playing the game as usual. Oko survived just 45 days before getting banned from Standard, and since it's banned in Standard, it's also gotten banned in Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy, not to mention Brawl and Historic on MTG Arena, their digital client. Now if you've been watching my channel, you'll know that I'm still pretty new to Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not going to pretend like I'm suddenly a Yu-Gi-Oh! Expert after playing for like just a month, so correct me if I'm wrong about anything I'm about to say in the comments, since I don't have any personal experience with these old formats. After consulting with my friends, the consensus seems to be that some of the most broken formats in recent memory were Tier Limits format and Snake Eye format. I don't know much about either of these old formats, but I still did my best to pull some examples of tournaments that happened in them anyways. At YCS Dortmund in November 2022, Tier Limits decks comprised 45% of the top 64 decks. And at YCS Raleigh in April 2024, Snake Eye made up over 53% of the top 32. Looking at the legality of the list played at both of these events, it seems like Konami eventually stepped in and banned several key cards from both decks to end their dominance over their respective formats. So this is the question that you guys have all been waiting for. Does Dragapult EX need to get banned? Is the meta share of Pult so high that Pokemon needs to step in and stop it once and for all? Before I get too far into it, let me finally address the elephant in the room. Pokemon, by and large, avoids banning cards whenever possible. I suspect that this aversion to bans is to avoid making kids upset by telling them, hey, you're not allowed to play your favorite card anymore. Pokemon only really bans cards when those cards are making the format completely unplayable. The last two cards to be banned in Pokemon were the supported card Bellelba and Bryson Man, and the Pokemon Mismagius. In the words of the Pokemon Company International, Bellelba and Bryson Man was banned because control decks and mill decks have a place in the Pokemon TCG, but when they become too powerful, the play environment becomes less enjoyable. And Mismagius was banned because it enabled powerful turn 1 hand disruption when combined with Reset Stamp and Duskstone. The Pokemon Company never banned Broken Lugia or other oppressive decks like Mew VMAX. Rather, Pokemon chooses to print hard counters to strong decks. Cards like Lily's Clefairy, Battle Cage, Psyduck, and the newly released Patrat are all attempts to rein in Pult's power, but so far, none of them have managed to take Pult down. Time will tell if Big Pika ever just rips off the band-aid and bans a card to fix Standard, but if I had to bet, I would put money on nothing ever getting banned. But that's not the point of this video, right? If all I wanted to ask is, do I think Dragapult will get banned? The answer would be almost certainly not, and this video wouldn't be very long or interesting. Instead, I want to discuss whether I think Pult should get banned. And in my opinion, I think it would help format diversity to take the deck down a few notches. So what are some cards that I think could reasonably deserve to get banned? The first option would be to ban Badoo. Badoo is used in a lot of slower setup decks, but in my opinion, no deck uses it better than Dragapult. Letting decks be faster again to prey on Dragapult's otherwise weak early game could help the format breathe a little bit while allowing Dragapult to still exist. Pult would most likely shift to a more aggressive playstyle using cards like Crispin and Rare Candy to start using Phantom Dive earlier, meaning it would have less time to draw lots of cards with Dread Cloak. If I were in charge of things and wanted Dragapult to still exist while tuning its power level down considerably, that's what I would do personally. The second option would be to ban Dusknoir. Dusknoir is a Pokemon that has an ability to knock itself out to put 130 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon. It's a very strong Pokemon that's been used in Dragapult decks to increase your single target damage from the 200 that Phantom Dive normally does, all the way up to 330, which is enough to kill most Stage 2 EX Pokemon, for example Dragapult. It's also used to knock out your opponent's weak Pokemon to cripple their setup. Dusknoir can feel absolutely oppressive and unfun at times, so I personally wouldn't mind seeing it gone. And it doesn't see much play outside of Dragapult and the very niche Starmie Dusknoir deck, so it'd be a pretty safe ban in terms of affecting other decks negatively. The big issue with banning Dusknoir to balance the format is that not every Dragapult list is playing Dusknoir as is, so banning it wouldn't completely fix the issue of Dragapult dominance. The last option would be to just ban Dragapult EX outright. It's the nuclear option. I could see how Pokemon would be hesitant to do that, since Dragapult doesn't make the game unplayable or broken or anything. But selfishly, I wouldn't mind seeing it gone from the format. It's had plenty of time in the sun, and getting rid of it would give time for other decks to shine as well. One interesting option that I've seen people talk about, but I see absolutely no chance of happening, is banning Dracloak instead of Dragapult EX. Unless a new Dracloak was printed, this sort of thing would force Dragapult decks to go all in on being aggressive and using rare candy to evolve and attack as quickly as possible. It would completely change Dragapult's playstyle, and it'd be interesting to see how the deck would adapt. But personally, I wouldn't love this myself because Dracloak is used in interesting ways in non-Dragapult decks. I've seen some control decks that use Dracloak alongside the Dunsparce to draw tons of cards and disrupt the opponent, and I would hate to see these decks killed for the sins of Dragapult EX. Dragapult EX started out as a niche deck with a strong attack that required a lot of setup to use, but the printing of Badoo gave the deck a way to slow down the game so that Pult could get completely set up. And when all of Pult's contemporaries rotated out of Standard, Dragapult was given free reign to take over the entire format. Now, if you want to play Pokemon TCG at a competitive level, you either have to play a deck that can handle the Dragon-type Stage 2 Pokemon, or just play Dragapult yourself. Ignoring the deck is no longer an option since you're guaranteed to hit it all of the time. What are your thoughts on Dragapult EX? Do you think the deck is fun to play or play against? What would you do if you were the Pokemon company? Would you ban Badoo, Dusknoir, or Dragapult EX itself? Would you print even more hyper-specific counter cards to try and nerf the deck? Would you just ignore it and let the problem solve itself in a year when Dragapult rotates out of Standard? Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching my video. Remember to give it a like if you enjoy my content, and a subscribe if you want to be notified about my next upload. It helps me out a ton as a new creator. I've set a goal to try and reach 1,000 subscribers, and every subscriber I get means a lot to me. And if you have any other thoughts about this video, be sure to leave a comment as well. I do read every single comment that you guys leave, even if I don't have time to respond to all of them. I've been having a lot of fun writing and editing these videos, and I've been getting great feedback from you guys. Also, I'm looking for new ideas for videos, and so if you have any thoughts, be sure to drop those in the comments as well. Thanks again for all of your support, and until next time, have a wonderful day.